Snow hisses on black stone. Beren's blood smokes in the cold as the wolf springs away, not south into madness, but north, back toward the iron hell. Behind it, Lúthien's cry is thin against the wind, and from Angband the mountains answer with a sound like chains dragged over bone. The beast vanishes between the gates, carrying a severed hand and a stolen star in its belly. If this darker road through Middle-earth earns a place on the map of imagination, leave a like, subscribe for more tales, and tell it in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? Beneath what sky? Beren had felt the change in the instant of the bite. In the true course of doom, Carcharoth fled in blind torment, driven by the holy fire in his guts and the pain of touching what evil could not master. But here the wolf's yellow eyes had cleared for one terrible heartbeat, as if another will looked through them. Morgoth, waking from enchanted sleep and feeling the theft like a knife, had not raged blindly. He had reached, so the wolf did not race toward Doriath. It turned and obeyed. Lúthien saw it first. The hem of her dark cloak was torn, her feet were cut on the broken slopes, and still she stood as if she might call the beast back with song alone. Beren, pale from blood loss, tried to rise and could not. Between them and the narrowing dark, the spoor of the wolf steamed on the frozen ground. "It is gone," he said. "No," Lúthien answered, her voice low and stunned. "It is being taken." That was the first question the New Age asked, and no one in Beleriand yet understood how cruelly it would be answered. What happened when stolen light was returned to the first thief before hope could carry it away? In Angband, there was no triumph at first. There was pain. Carcharoth came roaring through the tunnels, scattering orcs against the walls, froth boiling from its jaws, the swallowed Silmaril burning through flesh and entrails. The forges dimmed when it passed. Even the Balrogs gave way. At the foot of Morgoth's black throne, the great wolf collapsed, clawing at its own belly, and the dark enemy descended not like a king, but like a wounded mountain given shape, iron crown askew, face shadowed, one vast hand smoking where long ago he had touched the holy jewels. He looked upon the beast. He looked upon the dripping hand of Beren still trapped between its teeth. His humiliation had lasted less than an hour, and yet for Morgoth, that hour was a wound deeper than steel. The hall shook with his voice. "Open it!" The smiths of Angband obeyed with hooks and barbed knives. Carcharoth died under their work, choking on white fire. When at last the jewel was lifted out on black tongs, all the vaults beneath Thangorodrim filled with a hard, clear radiance that made every stain visible. Orcs shrieked and hid their faces. The iron around Morgoth's brow hissed as he set the recovered Silmaril once more beside its brothers. 3 lights burned above the Lord of Darkness, and none of them loved him. The pain of their hallowing did not heal him. It never could. Yet the completeness of the crown changed something in the world all the same. Morgoth had long poured so much of his being into Arda that all hurts within it answered faintly to his malice. Now, with all 3 Silmarils imprisoned again before his brow, his hatred had a mirror. The light did not serve him, but trapped and mocked within iron, it became a torment that he could turn outward. A pressure spread from Angband like winter through old cracks in stone. That night, the snow in Dorthonion glimmered red before dawn. In Nargothrond, deep under the banks of Narog, sleeping children woke and clung to their mothers, saying the river had begun to sing in a language of knives. On Himring's lonely height, Maedhros stood on the battlements and saw a glow over the north that was not sunrise and not flame. In Gondolin, hidden behind stone and secrecy, Turgon dreamed of a black crown carrying 3 captive sons. And when he rose, his chamber was colder than the mountain air. Far beyond the blue mountains, nor in the long grasslands that in another age would bear the riders of Rohan, shepherds looked up from their fires and saw a tremor of pale red on the western horizon. Southward, where the great river would one day watch over Gondor, fishermen found their nets silvered with a strange frost before midnight. Even in the green, forgotten lands that ages later would cradle the Shire, foxes barked into an empty dark and would not be comforted. In Menegroth, Melian the Maya turned her face north and went still. Thingol found her in silence beneath the beeches, where the first leaves had begun to curl, though spring was not yet spent. The Queen's gaze had passed beyond bark and branch. "What do you see?" he asked. She answered after a long while. "The door that was opened has shut again. But it has shut on our side." Thingol's pride was not easily taught by fear. Beren still entered Angband. He still cut the jewel from the crown. Even Morgoth can be shamed. Melian looked at him with grief older than moonlight. A shamed tyrant is often more dangerous than a victorious one. Beren and Lúthien came back to Doriath with no Silmaril to lay before the throne. Beren's right arm ended in bandages. His face was wan, and the lines of pain were hard around his mouth, but he carried himself like a man who had stood inside a storm and had not been broken by it. Lúthien walked beside him, and there was ash in her hair that no handmaid could entirely comb out. The court fell silent at the sight of them. Thingol rose. Many remembered the impossible bride price he had named in pride and suspicion. Many waited to see whether he would cling to the letter of it, now that the jewel itself was lost. Beren knelt because he chose to, not because he had been conquered. "He held it for a time," Thingol said at last, looking at the blood-dark cloth around the empty wrist. "That is more than any king of the Noldor achieved." "Then let pride die satisfied," said Melian softly. Thingol's gaze shifted to his daughter, and perhaps for the first time he saw not only her beauty, but the edge of mortality already touching her from afar. He went down from his throne. Before all his hall, he lifted Beren up with both hands. "You won what I demanded," he said. "Morgoth stole it back." Thus there was a brief season of grace. Beren, son of Barahir, wedded Lúthien Tinuviel beneath the green roof of Doriath, while harp strings trembled and lanterns swayed like fallen stars caught among the branches. Men and elves laughed together. Tables smelled of roast venison, wild herbs, and honey wine. The beech trunks shone gold in the lamplight, and for a few nights the world seemed almost persuadable again. Yet above the trees, the northern sky remained wrong. Maedhros understood that wrongness faster than most. The eldest surviving son of Feanor had lived too long with hopeless plans to mistake a gathering doom for mere weather. In the fortress of Himring, he called his brothers, his captains, and the allies who still trusted his word. Maps were spread on oaken boards. Candles shook in a draught that no one could find. The lines of Beleriand, rivers and hills and marching roads seemed suddenly fragile beneath mailed fists. "We had one chance stolen from us by arrogance," Maedhros said. "He did not name whose. He never needed to. Now Morgoth has what he once lost and knows what it is to lose it. He will not sit idle. If we wait, we feed him time." Maglor, whose songs could still make hardened soldiers stare into the fire, stood apart from the table. And if we strike too soon? Madros looked toward the north. Then we die before he is ready, or we die when he is. The room held its breath. Curafin's mouth twisted in old bitterness. Celegorm laughed once, sharp and humorless. The oath of Feanor still smouldered under all their counsels, but without a Silmaril in Doriath to inflame near madness against kin, its edge now pointed north with greater fury. That was one of the first cruel ironies of this changed world. One kinslaying was delayed, and because of that, an even larger war drew breath sooner. Messengers rode from Himring to Hithlum, to Brethil, to the dwarves of Belegost and Nogrod, to the scattered houses of men who had not yet bent knee to Angband. Secret words passed to Gondolin by hidden ways. At the havens of the Falas, shipwrights nailed planks by torchlight, as if the sea itself might soon have to carry all memory west. Hope rose. It was not a gentle hope, but iron has held many armies together. Could one assault, vast enough and desperate enough, still break the northern fortress before Morgoth learned how to use his regained prize? Beleriand moved, as if the answer might be yes. Morgoth already knew. He could not see every hidden veil simply because 3 jewels burned above him. But the restored crown sharpened his malice like a blade on stone. Fears deepened where his thought touched them. Pride became easier to wound. Greed found quicker purchase. Spies returned more swiftly with more accurate lies. Men who already leaned toward betrayal found their dreams filled with promises. Through pain, he had gained reach. In the eastern camps, Uldor and his sons listened to whispers in their sleep and woke persuaded that the winning side would pay better. In the shadows of Taunufuin, Sauron smiled beneath another face and set rumor against rumor until friends mistrusted the timing of friends. Across the Anfauglith, furnaces labored day and night. Glaurung, father of dragons, was let from restraint sooner than in the old tale, and the pits where winged horrors were being bred groaned under heavier chains. Then came the battle that would still be named the Nirnath Arnoediad, the battle of unnumbered tears, though now the tears began before the lines met. Morning broke over the plain in a yellow light blurred by smoke. Horses snorted steam. Men gripped spears with numb hands. Elven helms flashed briefly where the sun found them. The earth underfoot was dry above and wet beneath, so that every step made a muffled, sucking sound. On the western side, Fingon's banners streamed in the cold wind from Hithlum. In the east, Maedhros rode with what remained of the free princes. The dwarves moved like a wall of iron. For one moment, seen from high above, the host of the free peoples looked sufficient. Then the gates of Angband opened. The orcs came first, and after them the wolves, and behind them a black tide of armored trolls. Last, on a rise before Thangorodrim, Morgoth's standard was lifted. Above the black helm, through distance and fume, 3 hard lights glared. Soldiers who saw them thought not of beauty, but of captivity. It was as if the memory of the 2 trees had been nailed to a butcher's hook. Fingon heard men in his front ranks begin to pray under their breath. On Maedhros' wing, one of the sons of Bor spat in the dust and said, "If we do not end him today, there will be no day left to end." The first hours gave hope teeth. Fingon drove the orcs back with such fury that the plain rang under the tramp of retreat. The dwarves withstood dragonfire longer than any had thought possible. Húrin and Hur cut a lane through shields and carcasses toward the very smoke of Angband. For a little while, even Morgoth's captains doubted. Then the eastern banners faltered. Uldor turned. Men who had eaten salt with the sons of Feanor thrust spears into Noldorin backs. Confusion spread faster than command. Curufin rode to rally the broken flank and vanished in a wash of dragon flame so white at its heart that armor ran from his bones. Telegorm, trying to break through to him, was dragged from the saddle beneath a press of trolls and trampled into the churned mud he had mocked all morning. Their deaths were so sudden that some of their own warriors fought on for minutes before learning they were leaderless. Maedhros saw the east collapse and knew the field was lost, but he did not retreat at once. Neither did Maglor, and they gathered whom they could and drove toward the breach like men trying to close a sea gate with their bare hands. In the west, Fingon's cry carried above the noise. He had seen Turgon's banners appear from Gondolin in secret splendor, a last hidden strength revealed. For an instant, many believed the day had been turned. Then Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, came upon Fingon amid wreck and smoke, and the High King fell with his helm split and his banner buried under bodies. The rumor of that death passed through the host faster than truth could mend it. Turgon was forced back. Hur fell with a shaft in his eye. Húrin stood last beside the rearguard and swung his axe until it smoked with black blood. "Day shall come again," he cried, and the words were noble. But on that plain they sounded like something shouted across the mouth of a grave. By nightfall, the Anfauglith was carpeted with men, elves, dwarves, wolves, and broken gear. Rain began after sunset, thin and cold, washing blood into the ruts. The cries of the wounded rose and faded by turns. Morgoth had not merely won. He had taught the West how wide the gap had become. That might have been the ending of any lesser world. In Hithlum, the wives of warriors waited beside hearths gone low, listening for hooves that never came. In the birch woods of Brethil, children smelled smoke 3 days before refugees reached them. In Dolomin, Morwen Eledwen sat in a house with wind pushing through the thatch and understood, before any messenger spoke, that her husband had gone into torment and her son would inherit a broken age. Turin, still young, asked why the dogs would not stop howling. No one answered him honestly. After Nirnaeth, fear changed shape. It no longer came in sudden news only. It became weather. Morgoth's armies moved with confidence now, and every free realm felt the pressure. Taunufuin darkened further. The passes into the south grew perilous. Outlaws multiplied. Small homesteads vanished between one moon and the next, leaving only cold fires and tools on the floor. The scent of ash traveled farther than before. And always in the north, the Triple Crown burned. The girdle of Melian had long been a thing apart, a woven boundary of bewilderment and power through which evil wandered astray. Yet it depended on more than one queen's might. It rested also on the health of the world around it, on songs remembered, on patterns not yet wholly spoiled. Under the renewed pressure from Angband, those patterns frayed. The first signs were subtle. Birds flew confused and struck the outer branches at dusk. Deer approached clearings they had always avoided. The air at the border carried a taste like old iron. Beren noticed it because he had hunted in such places before. He had lived where terror left marks that kings rarely saw. At the northern marches of Doriath, he knelt one evening, touched the earth, and brought back fingers darkened not by mud, but by soot. Lúthien watched him from beneath the pines. She had been quieter since Nirnaeth, as if some listening within her had turned to a greater distance. "Will it hold?" he asked. "For a while," she said. He rose. "That is not an answer. It is the only one truth gives." Thingol would not abandon Menegroth. Pride remained in him, but so did love of the realm he had built beneath the beech roots. He ordered greater patrols. Beleg Strongbow took companies through the shadows. Mablung guarded the 1,000 caves. Armorers worked by lamplight, and the deep halls smelled of oil, leather, and anxiety. Yet there were still feast days, still songs for the children, still moments when Doriath tried to be itself. Then one winter night, the outer enchantments thinned like frost under black water. No army announced the breach with horns. Morgoth did not need trumpets where dread could walk first. Wolves came through the northern wood in silence, larger than any common beast, their coats wet with sleet, eyes pale in the dark. Behind them padded werewolves of Sauron's breed, and behind those came orc companies moving with uncommon discipline. At their rear, a captain out of Angband carried a spear tipped with a fang of dragonbone. The first screams rose from a watchpost where the fire had burned low. By the time the bells of Menegroth rang, snow was drifting through the outer halls. Thingol fought that night as kings of the elder days had fought, mail glittering beneath torchlight, blade red to the hilt. Beren was beside him with shield on left arm and sword in his right hand only, his maimed side turned skillfully away from danger. In corridor after corridor, the defenders held, gave ground, and held again. Lúthien voice moved through the caves like a light no shadow could entirely smother. Orcs halted at the sound. Wolves whined and backed from it, but song could not be in every chamber at once. Mablung fell in a side passage with 3 arrows in him, was still trying to close a door against a flood of enemies. Beleg, cut off in the woods beyond, never reached the inner caves. His horn was heard once, far off and fading into snow. In the great hall itself, Thingol slew the spear captain, but another took his place, and another after that. At last, a black arrow passed under the king's lifted arm where mail had shifted, and the Lord of Doriath stumbled against his own throne. When he fell, a sound passed through the hall that was not merely mourning. It was the crack of a story breaking. Beren reached him too late. He turned instead to the advancing werewolf chief that had leapt over the body, and man and beast struck together beneath the carved pillars. Beren drove his blade up through the throat. The wolf's jaws closed on his shoulder and tore deep. They collapsed, locked together in blood and fur. Lúthien came to them through smoke and drifting snow. Her father was dead. Her husband was dying. Around her, the hidden kingdom of her birth was being trampled into ruin. Then she sang. Many who heard that song would remember it only as cold, because the fever of battle went out of them. Others remembered warmth, like sun on leaves in a year too distant to trust. Orcs dropped their weapons and slept where they stood. Wolves crawled whining into corners. Even the flames in the wall hangings seemed to bend and listen. For a little while, in the heart of disaster, time itself was persuaded to kneel. It was enough to save a remnant, and not enough to save a realm. Menegroth emptied into the white woods before dawn. Refugees stumbled south with what they could carry, breath clouding before them. Children wrapped in cloaks that smelled of smoke and cedar. Behind them, the 1,000 caves were dark, their lamps extinguished, their king unmoving under the vault he had loved. Beren was borne on a litter of spears and cloaks. He did not wake after sunrise. On the banks of a cold stream, Lúthien sat beside him, while the remnant of Doriath shivered among the trees. No bird sang. Her tears had stopped. When his breath went out, she bent over him once, and then looked toward the west, as if hearing a door open far away. Those who watched knew that if she followed him, no call of theirs would bring her back. She did follow. There are griefs so immense that even the keepers of fate pause before them. In the halls beyond the circles of the world, Lúthien stood before Mandos and sang not as a princess of Doriath, nor as a Maia's child, nor as the fairest of the children. She sang as one who had seen joy made brief on purpose and still asked that love be allowed one answer. Her voice carried Beleriand's green years, Finrod's faith, Beren's wound, Thingol's pride, and the long unhealed hurt of Arda itself. Mandos listened, so Beren and Lúthien returned for a time, living and mortal together in the green island of Tolgalen. There, amid birches and running water, a fragile peace took root. Dior was born to them in that hidden place. For a season, the world narrowed to human warmth, bread on a wooden board, a child's hand catching sunlight, wind moving through reeds. The tragedy of the great tales often sharpens because of such ordinary moments. If loss came only to thrones, it would be easier to bear. Elsewhere, it did not pause. Nargothrond throned, proud and secret under Orodreth, became the next lesson. Turin's son of Hurin came there in exile, bearing already the shadow that would one day darken every hall he entered. He spoke for open war and broad bridges and visible strength. In another life, that counsel had mixed glory and ruin. In this darker road, Morgoth scarcely needed persuasion. Glaurung had grown more terrible sooner, and when at last the dragon came, the halls by Narog burned as if the river itself had caught fire. Finduilas died on the road under a sky full of crows. The scent of charred treasure and wet stone lingered for weeks. Morwen heard of it in a rain-lashed hut and closed her eyes, knowing her son's doom had found a larger stage. Gondolin held longer because hidden things often do, and because Idril Celebrindal trusted unease before men named it wisdom. Yet secrecy was thinning everywhere. Maglin's heart, always vulnerable to envy, became an easy instrument for an enemy who no longer needed to tempt from a distance. He was taken, promised lordship, and Idril both, and spoke. That betrayal was whispered to Morgoth beneath the light of the restored crown. When Gondolin fell, it fell in brilliance and smoke. White walls cracked under drakes and engines. Fountains ran red in the courts. The smell was of lime dust, hot metal, cedar beams, and fear. Tuor fought through alleys choked with sparks. Idril led a hidden way prepared in distrust and foresight. Little Arendil, not yet understanding what a city could mean, was carried through the tunnel, while behind him the bells of Gondolin rang until the towers themselves broke. On the slopes above the ruin, refugees turned for one last look. And flames were climbing where dawn used to touch the king's tower first. Turgon was gone. Glorfindel fell in single combat upon the pass, taking a Balrog with him into the abyss and sealing escape with his death. That should have been the end of one people's memory. Yet the survivors went on, because going on is often the most terrible courage. They came at last to the mouths of Sirion, where river met sea under long weather and wounded stars. There gathered the remnants of many endings, mariners from the Falas, Sindarin exiles from fallen Doriath, Gondolindrim with soot still in the seams of their armor, men with nowhere left to swear loyalty except to one another. Dior came there in time, grown now, carrying in his face the beauty of his mother and the steadier sorrow of his father. He had no Silmaril to wear, or no blazing heirloom to make him a target for kin. The sons of Fëanor came too, but not with drawn swords. The absence of the jewels spared that harbour one massacre, and for a while even Doom seemed uncertain what to do with mercy. Maglor, most weary of the brothers, sang at Sirion sometimes in the evenings. His voice crossed the water at low tide and sounded like something trying not to remember its own beginning. Children would fall silent to hear him. Elwing, daughter of Dior, listened most intently. Beside her stood Eärendil, son of Tuor and Idril, already looking west more often than east. If there was no Silmaril to bear over the sea, what could ever pierce the shadows guarding Aman now? That question lay over Sirion like mist. Years passed. The war in the north rumbled on in raids and rumors, but everyone knew the truth. No host in Middle-earth could overthrow Morgoth unaided. The Crown's 3 imprisoned fires remained visible on some clear nights as a wound in the horizon. Men aged. Elves grew more silent. Ships were built anyway. One evening, while rain tapped on the timbers and the harbour smelled of tar and salt and kelp, Eärendil sat with Elwing beneath a hanging lamp. Outside, gulls cried into the dark. He had tried westward passages before and been thrown back by storms, strange currents, and a weariness that felt almost willed against him. "They will not hear," he said, staring at the chart before him, not without a sign they cannot deny. Elwing folded the map shut with careful fingers. "If they need a jewel to pity us, then pity in Valinor is already dead." He looked up. The Silmaril was more than a plea. It was passage. Then passage must be won another way. He almost smiled at that. You speak as if the sea bargains. The sea remembers. Maglor, standing in the doorway unheard, answered before Eärendil could. "It remembers everything. That is why it is so hard to cross." They turned. The son of Fëanor came in from the wet night with spray on his cloak and old grief in his eyes. He laid a hand on the shipwright's table where the lamp made his scarred fingers seem older than stone. "There was once a light," he said, "that could have shamed the westward dark into opening. There is none now. Sail anyway." It was the best counsel he had left to give. So Eärendil prepared again. Vingilot was made leaner, swifter, her timbers chosen with a care that bordered on prayer. Tuor watched in silence, a feeling Ulmos' old summons stir once more in the surge and withdrawal of tide. Idril gave her son a cloak, lined against the cold no mortal sea chart could measure. Elwing kissed him without grandeur, because love at the edge of impossible things often becomes very plain. He sailed west under a moon-like hammered bone. For days there was only grey water and a wind that smelled clean enough to hurt. Then came mists, stillness, and the dreamlike reaches where many mariners had been turned. Here in the true tale, a Silmaril had burned on a brow and made a road. Here there was only stubbornness, lineage, grace unpromised, and the lingering favour of powers that had not entirely forgotten the children. Storms seized Vingilot. Spars screamed. Salt cut Eärendil's face raw. He steered by stars when he could, and by memory when he could not. At the blackest point of that voyage, when sea and sky were one shut door, white birds came out of the west and circled the mast. He followed them. At last, Aman rose, not as a fantasy, but as white shore and clear air, and a silence so pure it made all battle noirs seem like a bad memory in the blood. Elendil went before the Valar with no jewel in hand, no sanctified light to present as proof, only the history written on his own body and the mingled claim of elf, man and Maya in his line. He spoke of drowned fields, broken cities, the humiliation of light nailed to iron, and the weariness of those who still resisted when resistance had ceased to be reasonable. The Valar heard him. Perhaps they had always meant to act when the measure of suffering was full. Perhaps the sight of all three Silmarils again defiled under Morgoth's brow was blasphemy too stark even for patience. Perhaps compassion needed no jewel after all, only a witness who had crossed ruin to ask. Whatever the reason, the West moved. The War of Wrath began with relief. That was its first cruelty. For those on Middle-earth's shores, the coming of the host of Valinor looked at first like final deliverance. The sea flashed with white sails. Trumpets answered across waters that had known only gulls and grief. Veterans who had forgotten how to hope found themselves weeping at the sight of banners untouched by smoke. The air itself seemed cleaner. In the havens of Sirion, people laughed in disbelief and then covered their faces because laughter felt almost indecent after so much burial. Then the armies marched north, and the world learned how large deliverance could be when it had to break a god-shaped tyrant. The battles lasted years. Mountains were split. Rivers changed course in a night. The dust of shattered towers turned sunsets copper over lands far away, beyond Eriador, beyond the future bounds of Gondor, even to the distant emptiness where Rohan's grasses would one day ripple. Orcs fled east in black swarms. Balrogs died hard. Sauron vanished from field command, slipping from one ruin to another like a thought refusing judgment. Winged dragons came at last in numbers no chronicle could make sane. Above Angband, Morgoth wore all three Silmarils and dared the heavens to look. They burned him ceaselessly. His face beneath the crown was half hidden in smoke and shadow, and his rage had become a thing almost abstract, immense and cold. Yet he would not abandon the jewels. To surrender them would have been to admit the possibility that beauty existed beyond his spite. So he kept them and made of his own torment a standard for every creature still under his will. Elendil fought in that war, but not as a star. He flew no transfigured path through the upper air bearing holy light before him. He sailed Vingilot through mortal sky and storm against dragons and fell winds, guided by skill, desperation, and the eagles that came at need. When Ankalagan the Black rose at last from the pits like a moving range of mountains, blotting fire with greater fire, many thought even the host of the West would break. Elendil did not break. High over the ruin of Thangorodrim, amid ash and lightning and the beating of enormous wings, he met the dragon in air that smelled of brimstone and the sea. The struggle was seen for leagues, a small bright ship against a darkness vast enough to seem permanent. Thorondor and his eagles tore at the beast's eyes. Vingilot's mast snapped. Elendil, lashed to the deck, drove his prow through smoke and flame again and again until Ankalagan faltered, screamed, and fell. The dragon's body broke the peaks in its ruin. After that, Morgoth's end came quickly and at terrible cost. Angband was breached, the pits were opened, the forges drowned. Eönwes' host cast down the great enemy and bound him at last. When they struck the iron crown from his head, the ground itself seemed to exhale. There was silence then, sudden and unreal. No drums, no orders, no screams from the walls, only distant collapse, the hiss of cooling stone, and a wind moving over a battlefield too vast to comprehend. That silence felt like mercy. Then the sea began to claim Beleriand. This was the second cruelty of deliverance. In throwing down Morgoth, the powers of the world had broken the shape of the West. Valleys flooded, hills became islands, and then vanished. Rivers lost their mouths. The graves of kings went under the surf. People who had survived everything else stood on ridges with bundles in their arms and watched their histories drown. Among the wreck of Angband, the fate of the Silmarils was resolved not in majesty, but in exhaustion and doom. Yunwi would have held them for the judgment of the Valar, but Maedhros and Maglor came at last to the camp by stealth and despair. Their brothers were gone. Their oath remained. The jewels they seized burned their hands as if all the long years of blood cried out through light. Maedhros, unable to bear both pain and memory, fled into a fiery chasm newly opened in the convulsing earth and vanished with one. Maglor cast the other into the roaring sea and walked its shores thereafter in grief too deep for death to envy. The third was not set upon any brow. In the chaos of ruin, as the northern lands collapsed and waters thundered into the broken deeps, that last Silmaril was lost beneath the drowning of Angband itself, buried under silt, stone, and the black bones of the world. No mariner would carry it west. No star would be kindled from it in the sky. There was relief at first. Morgoth was gone beyond the walls of night. Survivors could breathe without waiting for the next horn from the north. Children were born who did not know the taste of ash in all seasons. The gulls still cried. Grass still rose in places where salt withdrew. Tuor and Idril passed at last into the west, their long burden eased. Arundel lived, scarred and celebrated, but he remained of the world, not above it. Elving stood often on western shores at evening, beside a man she had not lost to the heavens, and that, for a time, felt like grace. Dior did not rule a restored Doriath, because there was no Doriath left to restore. Yet the line of Beren and Lúthien endured in exile, quieter and more mortal than many songs had imagined. Their love had not brought a jewel home. It had preserved a people long enough for witness and pleading to survive. That mattered. It was simply not the sort of victory bards prefer. Melian did not return. Athingol lay in a drowned kingdom. Maglor wandered the coasts singing to waves that answered with the names of his dead brothers. In hidden places, Sauron gathered what he could from the ruins. Not the Silmarils themselves, but the lesson Morgoth had taught him. Light could be imprisoned. Beauty could be made into a torment. Hope, denied a visible shape, became harder for ordinary hearts to hold. That was the disquiet that deepened in the ages after. Without a Silmaril in the heavens, the westward evening lacked its most faithful sign. Mariners of Numenor still learned the seas, but one bright certainty was absent above the mast. In the Second Age, when pride flowered again among the mighty, there was no star reminding them nightly of a mariner who had crossed ruin for mercy. In the Third, when Gondor watched long frontiers and Rohan's riders turned their faces into bitter winds, dusk carried one less promise. In the far green land that would become the Shire, quiet folk looked up at autumn skies beautiful enough to content them, never knowing that beauty itself had once been brighter and nearer. Galadriel, wise beyond reckoning, could preserve many things, but she could not pour into a phial the light of a star that had never been lit. In dark places, that absence mattered. Tunnels remained darker. Ancient webs answered no captured radiance. Small hands reaching for courage found song, memory, friendship, and endurance. Sometimes those would be enough, sometimes not. So what had Morgoth gained by recovering all 3 Silmarils after Beren's quest, if in the end he was still defeated? Not victory in the simple sense, not healing, not lasting possession. He had gained something subtler and perhaps more terrible. He had denied the world one of its clearest symbols of unfallen light. He had made the ages that followed survivable, but dimmer. Even cast out, he had arranged for absence to do part of his work. And yet the answer was never wholly his. Beren still chose the impossible. Lúthien still crossed death for love. Eärendil still sailed without the sign that should have guided him. Again and again in this darker history, hope moved without guarantee and without glory. Perhaps that is why it endured at all. Even so, there remained in Middle-earth an emptiness no song could fill. At dusk, from the white walls of Gondor to the quiet lanes of the Shire, eyes would sometimes wander west and pause upon a place in the sky where one cold, a steadfast fire should have been, and meet only a clean, unanswering dark.